A barefoot 7-year-old girl stumbles through a blizzard, frostbite creeping up her fingers when she sees something impossible, fresh footprints leading to a cabin that wasn't supposed to exist. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the mountains of northern Colorado, tearing through the valley with a violence that seemed personal. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it consumed. Maya Chen pressed her small body against the frosted window of the rusted Honda Civic, her breath creating small circles of fog that disappeared as quickly as they formed. She was 7 years old, though the hollowness in her eyes made her look older, like she'd already lived a lifetime most people never touch. Her mother, Sarah, lay curled in the back seat, wrapped in every piece of clothing they owned. 3 blankets, 2 jackets, a beach towel from better days. Her breathing was shallow, rattling in her chest like loose change in an empty pocket. She'd been getting worse for 5 days now, each cough deeper than the last, each hour stealing a little more of her strength. The car had died 2 weeks ago, just gave up, like it had finally decided it was done carrying their broken dreams up and down these mountain roads. They'd been living in it for 8 months, ever since the eviction, ever since Sarah lost her job at the diner, ever since the world decided they didn't matter anymore. Now they were parked in a rest stop 20 miles outside the town of Ridgeline, a place so small it barely existed on maps. No one came here, especially not in January. Maya had counted the days since they'd eaten a real meal. 11. They'd been surviving on crackers from gas stations, the kind people leave in their cars and forget about. Yesterday, they'd run out. This morning, Sarah couldn't even sit up.
"Mama,"
Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm.
"Mama, I'm cold."
Sarah's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused.
"I know, baby, I know. Just hold on a little longer."
But Maya had been holding on. She'd been holding on her entire short life, holding on when they lost the apartment, holding on when kids at school laughed at her donated clothes, holding on when her stomach cramped from hunger and she pretended she wasn't even hungry. She was 7 years old and she was so tired of holding on. The snow had started falling 3 hours ago. At first, it was beautiful, soft flakes drifting down like feathers. But now it came in sheets, thick and angry, piling up against the car doors, sealing them in like a tomb. Maya watched through the window as the world disappeared behind a curtain of white. The parking lot was empty. No other cars, no people, just them and the storm.
"Mama,"
she said again, louder this time.
"Mama, we need help."
Sarah tried to respond but dissolved into a coughing fit that shook her entire frame. When it finally stopped, there was blood on her hand. Not much, just a small spot, but enough to make Maya's heart race. She'd seen that before, back when they still had an apartment, when her grandmother got sick. 3 weeks later, they'd gone to her funeral. Maya made a decision. She didn't think about it, didn't weigh the options. She just knew that sitting in this car meant watching her mother die. And she couldn't do that. She wouldn't. She pulled on her sneakers, cheap canvas things with holes in the toes that had been too big when they got them from the donation box 6 months ago. Now they almost fit. She wrapped Sarah's scarf around her neck, the one that still smelled like her mother's perfume from when they had perfume, from when they had anything. "I'm gonna find help," Maya said, trying to sound brave. Sarah reached out weakly, her fingers barely grazing Maya's arm. "No, baby, stay, please."
"I'll be fast, Mama, I promise."
Before her mother could protest further, Maya pushed open the car door. It fought her, the snow packed against it like concrete, but she was small and determined. She squeezed through the gap, and immediately the wind hit her like a physical force, nearly knocking her backward. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath, burning her lungs. She'd never felt anything like it. Maya pushed forward, wrapping her thin arms around herself. The rest stop was nothing, just a bathroom building that had been closed for the season and a parking lot. Beyond it, forest stretched in every direction, dark pines heavy with snow. She had no idea where to go. The highway was behind them, but she hadn't seen a car pass in 2 days. The town was ahead somewhere, but 20 miles might as well have been 1,000. She walked, one foot in front of the other, her sneakers filled with snow immediately, the wetness soaking through her socks, through her skin, into her bones. Her fingers went numb within minutes. She tried to keep them tucked under her arms, but she needed them for balance as she trudged through snow that came up to her knees. 10 minutes passed, or maybe 20. Time felt strange in the storm. Everything looked the same, white and endless and hostile. Maya's teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Her legs burned with cold and effort. She wanted to cry but was afraid the tears would freeze on her face. She was about to turn back, to admit defeat, to return to the car and curl up next to her mother and just wait for whatever came next. But that's when she saw it. A light, faint and yellow, flickering through the trees like a candle in a window. Maya blinked hard, sure she was seeing things. But no, it was there. A light meant people. People meant help. She changed direction, pushing toward it, her small body fighting through drifts that tried to swallow her whole. Branches grabbed at her clothes, her hair. Her face felt raw, scraped by wind and ice. But the light grew brighter, and then she saw the cabin. It sat in a small clearing, a structure that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Stone foundation, log walls dark with age and weather, a chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke that the wind scattered before it could rise. The windows glowed warm and inviting, but what stopped Maya in her tracks, what made her heart skip in her chest, were the footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading right up to the door. Someone was here, someone was inside. Maya stumbled forward, her frozen legs barely responding. She reached the wooden porch and nearly collapsed against the door. With numb fists, she pounded on the wood. "Hello, please, I need help. My mama's sick." Nothing. She pounded again, harder. "Please, somebody help us!" Still nothing. Maya pressed her ear against the door. She could hear something inside, a crackling, the fire. And was that music? Something soft, classical, coming from deeper in the cabin. Someone was definitely here. "Please!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm just a kid. My mama's dying." Silence. Maya's vision blurred with tears and exhaustion. She slumped against the door, her small body shaking violently from cold. This couldn't be happening. Someone was inside. She could hear them. Why wouldn't they help? Then she noticed the door handle. With trembling fingers, she reached out and turned it. The door swung open easily, warmth rushing out to greet her like an embrace. Maya hesitated for just a moment. Her mother had taught her never to go into strangers' houses. But her mother was dying in a frozen car, and this wasn't the time for rules. She stepped inside. The cabin was small but beautiful. A fire roared in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. A worn leather couch sat facing the flames. In the corner, a small kitchen area with a wooden table, and on that table, impossibly, was food. A plate of bread, cheese, what looked like soup in a bowl still steaming. "Hello?" Maya called out, her voice small in the warm space. "Is anybody here?" No answer. She moved deeper into the cabin, her wet shoes squeaking on the hardwood floor. The music was coming from an old radio on the mantel, a gentle piano piece that felt out of place in this moment of desperation. She checked the tiny bathroom. Empty. She looked in what appeared to be a bedroom barely bigger than a closet. Also empty. The cabin was warm, lived in, and completely abandoned. But those footprints outside had been fresh. Someone had walked through the snow recently. Someone had come here, lit the fire, prepared food, and then, what? Vanished? Maya turned back to the main room, and that's when she saw it. In the corner, partially hidden behind a tall bookshelf, was a wooden door set into the floor, a trapdoor, and around it, in the dust and bits of tracked-in snow, were more footprints, leading down. Her whole body told her to run. Every instinct screamed danger. Strange cabin, no people, mysterious basement. This was how horror stories started. But Maya thought of her mother's blood-flecked cough. She thought of the way her mother's skin had looked grey in the car's dim light. She thought of the 11 days without food, and the cold that had seeped so deep into her bones, she wondered if she'd ever feel warm again. Sometimes fear is a luxury you can't afford. Maya walked to the trapdoor and grasped the iron ring handle. It was heavy, but she managed to lift it. The door swung open on smooth, well-oiled hinges, revealing a set of wooden stairs descending into darkness. But not complete darkness. There was a glow coming from below, soft and amber like lantern light, and the footprints continued down. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. She looked back at the cabin's front door, at the escape route, at safety. Then she looked down into the unknown. She took a deep breath, placed her small foot on the first step, and began to descend. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, announcing her presence to whatever waited below. The air grew cooler as she went down, but not cold. It was climate-controlled somehow, comfortable. The walls around her were stone, old but well-maintained, with small electric lights set into the rock every few feet. This wasn't some simple root cellar. This was something else. At the bottom of the stairs, Maya found herself in a tunnel. Not a cave, but a constructed passageway with smooth walls and a level floor. It stretched ahead of her, curving gently to the right, the footprints continuing along its length. More lights lined the ceiling, giving everything a warm, almost cozy glow. She followed the tunnel, her fear mixing with curiosity now. The passage opened into a larger space, and Maya gasped. It was a room. A large underground room with actual furniture. Bunk beds lined one wall, at least 8 of them, each made up with colourful blankets and pillows. Along another wall stood shelves packed with canned goods, boxes of crackers, jars of preserves, bottled water. A third wall held clothing on racks, coats, pants, shirts in various sizes, all organised neatly. In the centre of the space sat a large wooden table with chairs, and beyond that she could see doorways leading to other areas. But what truly stopped her heart were the toys. A corner of the room was filled with them. Stuffed animals, board games, books, dolls, trucks. Things kids played with. Things kids needed. What is this place? Maya whispered to herself. The footprints led across the room to one of the doorways. Maya followed them, her curiosity now overpowering her fear. The next room was smaller, set up like a medical station. Shelves of medicine, bandages, thermometers, a cot with clean white sheets. Everything was organized with obvious care, labels on every container, supplies arranged by type and purpose. Her mother could use this. Whatever sickness was eating her from the inside, maybe something here could help. Maya's mind raced with possibilities. She could bring her mother here. They could hide. They could survive. But first, she needed to know who this place belonged to and where they were. Maya continued following the footprints through another doorway into what looked like a small library. Books lined every wall, sorted by size and subject. There was a desk with papers stacked neatly, a lamp, reading glasses. And on the wall above the desk, photographs, dozens of them. Children, all different ages, different backgrounds. Some photos looked old, faded with time. Others were recent, vibrant. In each photo, a child stood next to a tall man with kind eyes and a grey beard. The man's face was weathered, lined with age and something deeper, sorrow maybe or determination. The children all looked the same way Maya felt, lost, scared. But in these photos, also something else. Hopeful. Beneath the photos was a corkboard covered in news clippings, official-looking documents and handwritten notes. Maya couldn't read all of it, but she caught words. Missing child found. Runaway returned home. System failure. No resources available. And then she saw it. A letter pinned in the center of the board, the paper yellowed with age, the handwriting shaky but clear. To whoever finds this place. These children needed help that no one would give them. I couldn't watch them freeze. I couldn't let them starve. I couldn't let the system that failed my daughter fail them too. If you've come this far, you probably need help yourself. Take what you need. Stay as long as necessary. You are not alone anymore. You are not forgotten. The Keeper. Maya read the letter 3 times, her young mind trying to process what it meant. Someone had built this place specifically for children like her. Children the world had given up on. Children with nowhere else to go. A sound behind her made Maya spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the amber light, were 3 figures. Children like her. One looked about 10, a boy with shaggy dark hair and suspicious eyes. Another was a girl maybe 12 or 13, thin as a rail with her arms crossed defensively. The third was smaller, couldn't have been more than 5, clutching a stuffed rabbit and half hiding behind the older girl. They stared at each other in silence for a long moment. Finally, the older boy spoke, his voice rough with mistrust. "Who are you?" Maya found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm Maya. I followed the footprints. My mama's sick. She's in our car and she's dying and I didn't know where else to go." The children exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. The older girl's expression softened slightly. "How did you find this place?" "The cabin. I saw a light. The door was open." "The Keeper's door is never open," the boy said sharply. "Not unless he wants it to be." "I don't know who the Keeper is," Maya said, her voice cracking. "I just need help. Please. My mama doesn't have much time." The little one with the stuffed rabbit stepped forward slightly. "Is your mama nice?" The question was so unexpected, so heartbreakingly innocent that Maya almost started crying. "Yes, she's the best mama in the whole world. She's just sick and we don't have any money for doctors, and we've been living in our car and—" "We know," the older girl interrupted gently. "We all know what that's like." She stepped closer, and in the better light, Maya could see her face clearly. She was pretty despite the hardness in her eyes, with brown skin and hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "My name's Jade. This is Tommy," she gestured to the older boy. "And this is Lily." The small girl with the rabbit gave a tiny wave. "There are more of us," Jade continued. 7 total, not counting you. The Keeper brings us here when he finds us on the streets, or in abandoned buildings, or—" She looked at Lily. "When someone hurts us." "The Keeper," Maya repeated. "The man in the photos?" Tommy nodded. "His real name is Mr. James Holloway. He was a social worker like 30 years ago. His daughter died when she was 14, froze to death in an abandoned building after she ran away from a foster home. After that, he spent his whole life savings building this place. He finds kids who fall through the cracks and brings them here until he can find them somewhere safe to go." "Is he here now?" Maya asked, looking around nervously. "He went into town for supplies," Jade said. "He'll be back soon. The storm probably slowed him down." Maya's heart sank. My mama doesn't have that kind of time. She needs help now. She needs medicine and warmth and— Her voice broke completely. "She's dying." Lily walked up to Maya and took her hand. Her small fingers were warm and surprisingly strong. "We can help your mama," she said simply. "That's what this place is for." Maya looked down at the little girl, then up at Jade and Tommy. "Really?" Jade nodded. "That's literally the whole point. Mr. Holloway says every life matters, even when the world says it doesn't. Where's your car?" "The rest stop, I don't know, I walked for a long time." "Route 17 rest area?" Tommy asked. "The closed one?" "I think so. There's just a bathroom building and nothing else." Tommy looked at Jade. "That's only about 1.5 miles through the woods, maybe 2 miles if you take the road." "We can't take the road," Jade said firmly. "If anyone sees us, they'll call someone. Then we're all in trouble." "So we go through the woods," Tommy said. "It's a straight shot if we follow the creek bed." Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. These children, who owed her nothing, who didn't even know her, were planning a rescue mission for her mother. "You'd do that? For us?" Jade smiled for the first time, and it transformed her entire face. "You followed footprints through a blizzard to an impossible cabin to save your mama. Yeah, we'll help. That's exactly the kind of person who belongs here." Within minutes, they were moving. Jade pulled winter gear from the clothing racks, proper snow pants, insulated jackets, waterproof boots that actually fit. She dressed Maya like a mother would, checking zippers, adjusting hoods, making sure nothing was too tight or too loose. Tommy gathered supplies into a backpack: blankets, a thermos of hot soup, medicine from the medical room, hand warmers. Lily insisted on coming too, though Jade tried to convince her to stay. "I'm little," Lily argued. "I can help carry stuff because I'm not heavy and I won't get tired." They left the other children behind with instructions to prepare one of the beds in the medical room. Then the four of them ascended the stairs, crossed through the warm cabin, and plunged back into the storm. But this time Maya wasn't alone. This time she had help. This time she had hope. They moved through the forest like a small, determined army. Tommy led, following the frozen creek bed with confident steps, despite the snow that tried to slow them down. Jade came next, then Maya, with Lily bringing up the rear, her stuffed rabbit somehow still clutched under one arm despite wearing mittens. The journey that had taken Maya so long alone took less than 30 minutes with guides who knew the way. When the rest stop came into view, Maya's heart nearly stopped. The car was almost completely buried in snow. If they'd waited another hour, it would have been invisible. "Mama!" Maya screamed, running the last few yards, her new boots finding traction where her old sneakers had failed. She fell to her knees beside the back door and scraped snow away with her hands. Tommy came up behind her and helped, his strong arms moving the heavy snow like it was nothing. They got the door open. Inside, Sarah lay exactly as Maya had left her, but worse. Her lips had a blue tinge. Her breathing was so shallow it barely moved her chest.
"Mama!"
Maya sobbed, shaking her mother's shoulder.
"Mama, wake up! I got help! You have to wake up!"
Sarah's eyes fluttered but didn't open. Jade squeezed into the car from the other side, pressing her fingers against Sarah's neck, checking for a pulse. "She's alive, but barely. We need to move fast." They worked together, these four children in the middle of a blizzard. They wrapped Sarah in the blankets they'd brought, positioned her carefully, and then, with strength that seemed impossible for their small bodies, they lifted her. Tommy and Jade took most of the weight, but even Maya and Lily helped, supporting where they could, steadying when needed. The journey back was harder, slower. More than once, they had to stop and rest, laying Sarah gently in the snow while they caught their breath. But they never quit. Not when the wind picked up. Not when Tommy slipped and nearly fell into the frozen creek. Not when Jade's arms shook from exhaustion. They carried her all the way to the cabin, up onto the porch, through the warm interior that felt like stepping into a dream, and down into the underground sanctuary. The other children were waiting, just as Jade had instructed. They had the medical room ready, the bed made with fresh sheets, warm water in a basin, medicine organized on the table. They laid Sarah on the bed and immediately went to work. And these children, who had learned to survive in a world that had abandoned them, who had been cared for by a man who refused to let them disappear, became caregivers themselves. They cleaned Sarah's face with warm water. They gave her medicine, antibiotics that Mr. Holloway had stockpiled for exactly this kind of emergency. They wrapped her in heated blankets. They monitored her breathing, her temperature, her pulse, and Maya watched, tears streaming down her face, as this family of forgotten children fought to save the one person in the world who mattered to her most. Hours passed. The storm outside continued to rage, but down here, in this underground haven built by a man who had lost everything and chose to give anyway, there was warmth, there was safety, there was care. Sarah's breathing slowly, gradually began to deepen. Color returned to her cheeks. Her temperature dropped from dangerous fever to manageable warmth. And just as the clock on the wall showed it was past midnight, her eyes finally opened. "Maya?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. Maya rushed to her side, grabbing her mother's hand. "I'm here, Mama. You're okay. We're okay." Sarah looked around the medical room, confusion crossing her face. "Where are we? How did we—" "I found us help," Maya said simply. "I followed footprints." And as she said it, as she looked around at Jade and Tommy and Lily and the other children who had gathered in the doorway to see if the mama was okay, Maya realized something profound. She hadn't just followed footprints through snow. She'd followed them toward something bigger than rescue. She'd followed them toward family, toward purpose, toward proof that even when the world forgets you, there are still people who will remember. There are still those who will leave doors open and lights burning for anyone who needs to find their way home. The footprints hadn't just led her to a cabin. They'd led her to hope. And sometimes, hope is the only medicine that really matters. Sarah Chen slept for 16 hours straight. Maya never left her side, curled up on a chair that Jade had pulled close to the medical bed, her small hand wrapped around her mother's fingers. Every hour, one of the children would come check on them, taking Sarah's temperature, making sure she drank water when she stirred, adjusting blankets, bringing Maya food she barely touched. When Sarah finally woke fully, the sun had set again outside, though you couldn't tell from down here in the underground sanctuary. The lights maintained their steady amber glow, time marked only by the clock on the wall and the rumbling of hungry stomachs. "Maya," Sarah whispered, her voice still weak, but no longer rattling with sickness. "Baby, what happened? Where are we?" Maya sat up quickly, relief flooding through her like warm water. "Mama, you're awake, really awake." "I feel like I got hit by a truck," Sarah said, attempting a smile. "But I'm okay?" She said it like a question, as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. "You're okay," Maya confirmed, squeezing her mother's hand. "You were really sick. I went to find help, and I found this place, and there are other kids here, and they helped me carry you, and they gave you medicine, and—" "Slow down, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, pushing herself up slightly on the bed. Her eyes widened as she took in the room properly for the first time. The medical supplies, the organization, the cleanliness. "Maya, what is this place?" Before Maya could answer, Jade appeared in the doorway. She'd changed into fresh clothes, jeans and a sweater that looked warm and comfortable, nothing like the survival gear from earlier. "You're awake," she said, a note of genuine relief in her voice. "That's good. We were starting to worry." Sarah stared at her. "Who are you? Where are my daughter and I?" "My name is Jade. I'm 15, and you're somewhere safe." She stepped into the room, her posture careful, non-threatening. Maya recognized the body language. It was the same way you'd approach a scared animal. "I know this is confusing and probably scary, but I promise you're not in danger. None of us are." "None of us," Sarah repeated. "How many children are here?" "8 now, counting Maya," Jade said. "Would you like to meet everyone? They've been asking about you." Sarah looked at Maya, who nodded enthusiastically. "They saved you, Mama. They saved both of us." Slowly, carefully, Sarah stood up. Her legs shook slightly, but she was steady enough. Jade offered her arm for support, which Sarah took gratefully. Together, the three of them walked out of the medical room and into the main living area. The space had transformed since Maya had first seen it. Now it was alive with activity. Tommy sat at the large wooden table with 2 younger boys, all of them bent over what looked like homework. Lily played on the floor with another small girl, building something with colorful blocks. An older boy, maybe 17, stood at a small kitchenette area stirring something in a pot on a camp stove. The smell of cooking soup filled the air. They all looked up when Sarah entered. And Sarah, who had been expecting, what? Dirty children? Scared children? Instead saw young people who looked healthy, cared for, purposeful. "Everyone," Jade said, her voice carrying authority despite her age. "This is Sarah, Maya's mum. Sarah, this is our family." The older boy at the stove waved a wooden spoon in greeting. "I'm Marcus. Welcome. Soup's almost ready." "I'm Lily," the smallest girl announced proudly, as if Sarah might have forgotten from their brief encounter during the rescue. "And this is Sophie." She gestured to the girl playing blocks with her. Sophie, who looked to be about 6, gave a shy wave. Tommy stood from the table. "You remember me from before. These are my study buddies. That's Daniel." He pointed to a boy with glasses who looked about 12. "And that's Alex." Alex, who couldn't have been more than 9, grinned and gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak again, but not from illness, from the impossibility of what she was seeing. "You're all living here? Underground?" The keeper built this place, Marcus said, bringing over a chair for Sarah to sit. Started construction like 30 years ago, right after his daughter died. He keeps expanding it, adding rooms, making it better. There's even a ventilation system connected to the surface, disguised as natural rock formations. Airflow, temperature control, the whole deal. He was an engineer before he was a social worker. The keeper, Sarah repeated, lowering herself into the chair. Maya mentioned him. Where is he? He went to town 3 days ago for supplies, Jade explained, sitting across from Sarah. The storm came in faster than anyone expected. He's probably stuck there until it clears. He won't risk the drive back in that weather. Too dangerous. So you're all here alone? Sarah asked, a note of concern in her voice. We're not alone, Daniel said, looking up from his homework. We have each other, and we have rules, and a system. Mr. Holloway taught us everything we need to know. Sarah shook her head slowly, trying to process. I don't understand. Why doesn't anyone know about this place? Why hasn't anyone reported it? The room went quiet. The children exchanged glances, that same unspoken communication Maya had noticed before. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice lower, more serious. Because if anyone knew, they'd shut it down. They'd take us all away and put us back in the system. And the system? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The system is why we're here in the first place. I don't, Sarah began, but Jade interrupted gently. Maybe we should show you, she said. Would you be okay to walk a bit more? There's something you should see. Sarah looked at Maya, who nodded encouragingly. It's okay, Mama. You need to see. They walked through the underground sanctuary, and as they moved, Sarah began to understand the scope of what she was seeing. This wasn't just a basement or a bunker. It was a fully functioning living space. They passed a room set up as a classroom, complete with desks, a whiteboard, and shelves of textbooks. Another room held exercise equipment and what looked like a small indoor garden with grow lights nurturing vegetables and herbs. There was a bathroom with running water, a shower, even a small laundry area with a washer and dryer. How is any of this possible? Sarah breathed. The electricity, the water, the ventilation. Mr. Holloway was really smart about it, Tommy explained as they walked. He connected to the power grid legally through the cabin above, has a water well that's registered to the property. Everything looks normal from the outside. Just an old man living in a cabin in the woods. Nobody looks closer. They arrived at the room Maya had seen before, the library with the photographs and the corkboard covered in documents. But now, with her mother beside her and time to really look, Sarah began to read. The news clippings told stories of children lost in the system, teenagers who aged out of foster care and became homeless, kids who ran away from abusive situations and were never searched for with any real effort. Reports of overcrowded facilities, underfunded programs, social workers with caseloads so high they couldn't possibly track everyone. This is from 1998, Sarah said, reading one article. This says a 14-year-old girl froze to death in an abandoned building in Denver. The foster family she was placed with didn't report her missing for 6 days. By the time anyone looked, she was... Sarah's voice trailed off as she read the name. Molly Holloway. His daughter, Jade said quietly. She ran away because her foster father hit her. She called Mr. Holloway. He was her actual father, but he'd lost custody during a divorce. He tried to get her back, but by the time he found out where she was, it was too late. They found her body 3 days after she died. She was 2 blocks from the social services office, but nobody saw her. Nobody looked. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Oh, God. After that, Marcus continued, he quit his job, sold his house, took his entire pension, and bought this property. Spent years building this place. He started small, just helping 1 or 2 kids at a time. But word spread, not publicly, but on the streets. Homeless kids, we talk to each other. We warn each other about dangerous places, and we tell each other about safe ones. This became a legend, the keeper who never turns anyone away. But why not work within the system? Sarah asked. Why not become a foster parent or open an official shelter? He tried, Daniel said. There's documents about it in the files. He applied to be a foster parent in 1999. They rejected him because he was single and living in a remote area. He tried to start a non-profit youth shelter in 2003. Couldn't get the funding or the permits. He tried working with local churches, community organizations, even the police. Everyone said they wanted to help, but when it came down to it, there were always too many regulations, not enough resources, too much liability. So he built his own solution, Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning on her face. He saves the ones everyone else gives up on, Jade said. I was living under a bridge in Colorado Springs when he found me. I'd been there for 8 months. Social services knew about me. I'd been reported 3 times. They'd come by twice, given me pamphlets about shelters that were always full, told me to go to the youth crisis center that closed at 5 p.m. every day. I was 15. Nobody actually helped until Mr. Holloway showed up with a warm blanket, hot food, and an offer. He said, I have a place where you can be safe, where you can heal, where you can figure out your next step. No pressure, no judgment, no timeline. But you have to want it. I'd been in 7 foster homes, Tommy added. 3 of them were fine, just crowded. 4 of them were hell. The last one, the dad would lock us in the basement when he drank. I ran away and lasted 2 weeks on my own before Mr. Holloway found me sleeping in a library. I was 14. That was 2 years ago. One by one, the children shared their stories. Marcus, whose mother died of an overdose and whose father was in prison. Daniel, who was kicked out by his family when he came out as gay at 12 years old. Sophie, who had been in the system since she was 3 and had been moved 17 times in 4 years. Alex, whose parents were deported and who had nowhere else to go. And Lily, who simply said, the bad man is gone now, and wouldn't elaborate further, though the scars on her arms told their own story. Sarah listened to each story, tears streaming down her face. Maya sat beside her, holding her hand, beginning to understand for the first time that her story of living in a car with her sick mother wasn't unique. It was just one of thousands, one of millions. We're not kidnapped, Jade said firmly. We can leave whenever we want. Mr. Holloway makes that clear from day one. He helps us get IDs, birth certificates, whatever documents we need. He homeschools us or helps us enroll in online programs. He teaches us life skills, cooking, budgeting, how to apply for jobs. When we're ready, he helps us transition to whatever comes next. Some kids stay for a few weeks. Some, like me and Tommy, have been here for years.
How does he afford all this? Sarah asked.
His pension, some investments, and he works, Marcus said. He does handyman jobs around various towns, never in the same place too often. Fixes furnaces, repairs roofs, that kind of thing. Gets paid cash, usually. He's incredibly careful about money. Everything down here is second-hand or salvaged or donated anonymously. He's built a whole network of people who help without asking questions. What happens next will turn Sarah's understanding of everything upside down, reveal a truth that will change her family's future forever, and show her that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones society forgets. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Sarah stood and walked to the corkboard, reading document after document. Reports of children who had fallen through the cracks. Statistics about homelessness among minors. Letters Mr. Holloway had written to politicians, social workers, journalists, all carefully dated and filed. Letters that were never answered or were answered with polite variations of, "We're sorry, but there's nothing we can do." He's been documenting everything, Sarah said, her voice filled with awe and heartbreak. Every child helped, every attempt to work with the system, every failure of that system to respond. This isn't just a shelter, it's evidence. He says someday he'll expose it all, Jade said. When he's too old to do this anymore, or when he has enough documentation that they can't ignore it. He says someone needs to prove the system is broken before it can be fixed, but until then, he just keeps saving whoever he can, one kid at a time. Sarah turned back to face the children. This is incredible. This man, Mr. Holloway, I don't even have words. He's a hero, Maya said simply. Right, Mama? Sarah pulled her daughter close. Yes, baby, he really is. But so are they, Maya added, gesturing to the other children. They saved you. They came out in the storm and carried you and gave you medicine and took care of you. They didn't even know us. Sarah looked at each young face in the room. Children who had every reason to be bitter, to be selfish, to hoard what little safety they'd found. Instead, they had risked that safety to help strangers. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you all so much. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." "You don't repay it," Marcus said with a shrug. "You pay it forward. That's what Mr. Holloway always says. Help came to you when you needed it most. So someday, when you're able, you help someone else. That's how we make the world better. One act of kindness at a time." Over the next 2 days, as the storm continued to rage above ground, Sarah grew stronger. She helped with cooking, learning the efficient system the children had developed for meal preparation. She assisted with lessons, discovering that several of the kids were actually ahead of grade level despite their circumstances. She watched as they played games, did chores, resolved conflicts with a maturity that belied their ages. And she learned their routines. Wake up at 7, breakfast together at the big table, schoolwork from 8 to noon, lunch, free time for an hour, more studying or skill-building activities until 5. Dinner preparation, dinner together. Evening was for reading, games, or whatever they wanted. Lights out at 9 for the younger kids, 10 for the older ones. "Mr. Holloway says structure is what keeps us healthy," Daniel explained, as he showed Sarah the schedule posted on the wall. "When you're homeless, there's no structure. Every day is just surviving until the next day. Here we have routines, we have expectations, we have purposes." "And chores," Alex added with a dramatic groan. "So many chores." "You're assigned dish duty twice a week," Daniel said, rolling his eyes. "That's not so many chores." "Feels like a lot when I'm doing them," Alex muttered, but he was smiling. Sarah found herself smiling too. These children had created a family from nothing. They teased each other like siblings, supported each other like friends, and operated with the smooth coordination of a well-practiced team. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. Sarah and Maya were helping Lily sound out words in a picture book when they heard it. The rumble of an engine above, followed by footsteps on the cabin floor, heavy and deliberate. Every child in the sanctuary froze. Then, as one, they erupted in motion. Tommy and Marcus rushed toward the stairs. Jade called out, "He's back! Mr. Holloway's back!" They thundered up the stairs like a stampede, and Sarah followed more slowly with Maya, both of them curious to finally meet the man who had built this impossible haven. In the cabin above, a tall man was shaking snow from his coat. He was old, probably in his early 70s, with a thick grey beard and deep-set eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His face was weathered like old leather, lines carved by years of hard work and harder grief. He wore practical clothes, work pants, a flannel shirt, heavy boots, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to conserve energy. The children swarmed him. Lily attached herself to his leg. Alex and Daniel talked over each other, trying to tell him everything that had happened. Tommy took the heavy bags from his hands. Jade just stood close, her expression softer than Sarah had ever seen it. All right, Mr. Holloway said, his voice deep and warm like distant thunder. "Let me get inside proper before you knock me over. I'm not as steady as I used to be." His eyes swept the room and landed on Sarah and Maya at the bottom of the stairs. "Well now, we have new guests." "Mr. Holloway," Jade said, stepping forward. "This is Sarah and Maya. Maya found us during the storm. Her mother was sick in their car at the Route 17 rest stop. We brought them here. They've been here 3 days. Mr. Holloway's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, concern, and finally, understanding. He walked over slowly, studying Sarah with eyes that seemed to see everything. "You were the Honda Civic," he said. It wasn't a question. "I saw it when I was driving to town. Thought about stopping, but the storm was coming in fast, and I needed to get supplies before the roads closed. I meant to check on the way back, but..." He gestured vaguely at the snow outside. "Sometimes we don't get to do things the way we plan."
Your children saved our lives, Sarah said quietly. We would have died if they hadn't found us.
They're not my children, Mr. Holloway corrected gently. They're their own people. I just provide a place for them to grow. He extended a weathered hand. James Holloway. Most folks call me Jim.
Sarah shook his hand. Sarah Chen. This is my daughter Maya.
Jim crouched down to Maya's level with a slight grunt of effort. You're the brave one who went looking for help in a blizzard then? Maya nodded shyly. That took real courage, Jim said seriously. Not many 7-year-olds would do that.
I'm almost 8, Maya corrected. My birthday's in April.
Almost 8, Jim amended with a smile. Even more impressive. He stood back up, addressing Sarah. I imagine you have questions.
About 1,000, Sarah admitted. Fair enough. Let me put these supplies away and we'll talk. Kids, help me unload the truck.
The children sprang into action, filing out into the cold to bring in boxes of food, supplies, and necessities. Sarah noticed that Jim watched them with a mixture of pride and sadness, like every moment with them was precious because he knew it was temporary. Once everything was unloaded and organized, a process that took the better part of an hour, Jim made a pot of strong coffee and sat down with Sarah at the cabin's small kitchen table. The children had retreated back underground to give them privacy, though Sarah suspected several of them were listening from the top of the stairs.
So, Jim said, wrapping his hands around his mug, what do you want to know? Is any of this legal? Sarah asked bluntly.
Jim chuckled. That's usually the first question. The answer is, mostly. The cabin and land are legally mine. The shelter beneath is technically just a basement, though obviously more extensive than what's on the building permits. The children who are here are not reported missing, either because no one's looking for them or because they're old enough to be classified as runaways rather than missing persons. I don't hold anyone against their will. I don't prevent them from contacting authorities if they want to. I'm not running a cult or a criminal organization.
But you're not a licensed foster parent, Sarah said. You're not an official shelter.
No, Jim agreed, because the official system failed these kids. The official system failed my daughter. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. He took a sip of coffee. I know I can't do this forever. I'm 73 years old. My knees hurt, my back hurts. I get tired easier every year. But until I physically can't anymore, I'll keep doing it, because someone has to.
Why tell me all this? Sarah asked.
You don't know me. I could report you. Jim studied her for a long moment. You could, he acknowledged. But I don't think you will, because you understand what it's like when the system doesn't work for you, when you fall through the cracks and no one catches you. Your daughter told Jade you've been living in your car for 8 months. You lost your apartment, lost your job, got sick, and I'm guessing you tried to get help, didn't you? Sarah's jaw tightened. I applied for housing assistance. There's a 2-year waiting list. I applied for food stamps. Takes 6 weeks to process and requires an address for mail. I went to 3 different shelters. They were all full. One of them said they'd have a bed available in 2 months. I tried to find work, but who's going to hire someone living out of their car? Who's going to trust me with their business when I don't have an address or a phone number that's not a pay-as-you-go cell that dies every time I can't afford to refill it? And when you got sick? Jim prompted gently. I went to the emergency room. They treated the immediate crisis and sent me home with a prescription I couldn't afford to fill and instructions to follow up with a primary care doctor I don't have. They gave me a list of free clinics. None of them had appointments available for 6 weeks. Sarah's voice cracked. I was dying, and the system's answer was, wait your turn. Exactly, Jim said. That's what happened to my Molly. She needed help right then, in that moment. But there were forms to fill out, procedures to follow, proper channels to go through. By the time the system was ready to help her, she was dead. He set down his coffee cup. I built this place because I refuse to make children wait while bureaucracy takes its time. If someone needs help now, they get help now. We sort out the details later.
But what happens when you can't do this anymore? Sarah asked. When you're too old or too sick or dead, Jim finished. I've thought about that a lot.
I've been documenting everything. Every child helped, every system failure, every letter ignored by officials who were supposed to care. When I'm gone, it all goes public. Newspapers, internet, everywhere. And maybe it'll be enough evidence to force change. To prove that kids are dying not because there's no solution, but because the people with power to implement solutions choose not to. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. The kids told me you helped them transition out, that they don't stay here forever. That's right, Jim said. This is a way station, not a permanent home. Though some, like Jade and Tommy, have been here longer because their situations are more complex. When kids are ready, I help them find proper placements, relatives, approved foster homes, independent living programs. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes years, but the goal is always to move them toward a sustainable future. And if someone wanted to stay? Sarah asked. If someone wanted to help? Jim's eyes sharpened. What are you asking, Sarah? Sarah took a deep breath. Maya and I don't have anywhere to go. Our car is buried in snow and probably won't start anyway. Even if it did, I'm not strong enough to drive yet. We don't have money, we don't have family. But I can cook, clean, help with the kids. Maya's smart. She could help the younger ones with their reading. We wouldn't be a burden. We could contribute. You want to stay, Jim said slowly. I want my daughter to have a roof over her head and food in her stomach and other children to play with, Sarah said fiercely. I want to be somewhere safe while I get my strength back and figure out our next move. And if I can help other people while I'm doing that, if I can be useful, then yes, I want to stay. Jim was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might refuse. Then he said, There are rules. Everyone contributes according to their ability. Everyone respects everyone else's space and story. No drugs, no alcohol, no violence. Education is mandatory for everyone under 18. And most importantly, this place stays secret. The more people who know about it, the more danger everyone is in. I understand, Sarah said. And when you're ready to leave, when you've found your footing and have somewhere to go, you leave. This isn't about dependence. It's about giving people a chance to rebuild. I understand that too. Jim extended his hand across the table. Then welcome to the family, Sarah Chen. Sarah shook it, and for the first time in 8 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. She felt hope. That night, Sarah and Maya were given their own space. A small room just big enough for a bunk bed and a dresser. It wasn't much, but to them, it was everything. Maya chose the top bunk and laid there staring at the ceiling, a real ceiling over her head instead of a car roof. Mama, she said into the darkness. Yes, baby? Are we going to be okay? Sarah climbed up the ladder and squeezed onto the narrow mattress beside her daughter. She wrapped her arms around Maya and held her close. Yeah, baby. I think we really are. And as they lay there together, warm and safe and surrounded by the quiet sounds of other children sleeping nearby, Sarah thought about the footprints Maya had followed. Footprints that had led them not just to shelter, but to something bigger. To proof that even in a broken world, there were people who refused to accept that brokenness. People who built solutions when the system built barriers. People who said, not on my watch, when everyone else said, not my problem. James Holloway had lost his daughter to the cold and the indifference of bureaucracy. But he'd responded not with bitterness, but with action. He'd built a sanctuary where forgotten children could be remembered, where lost souls could be found, where the world's most vulnerable could be safe. And now Sarah and Maya were part of that sanctuary, part of that family, part of that solution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be questions to answer, logistics to figure out, a future to plan. But tonight, in this moment, they had what they needed most. They had a home. The weeks turned into months, and winter slowly released its grip on the Colorado mountains. Snow melted into rushing streams. Ice gave way to mud, then to the first brave shoots of green pushing through thawing earth. And in the underground sanctuary, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Sarah threw herself into helping wherever she could. She took over most of the cooking, transforming the simple meals the children had been preparing into actual cuisine. She organized the pantry with a system that made sense, labeled everything, and created a rotating menu that ensured balanced nutrition despite their limited resources. She helped the younger children with their schoolwork, drawing on her own incomplete college education to explain math concepts and grammar rules. But more than that, she became a mother to all of them. Not to replace whatever parents they'd lost or left behind, but to provide what they needed in this moment. A listening ear when Tommy struggled with nightmares about his last foster home. A gentle hand braiding Lily's hair in the mornings. A firm but fair voice when Alex and Daniel got into arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes. A warm hug when Sophie cried for a mother she barely remembered. Maya bloomed in this environment. She'd always been a quiet, anxious child, worried about being a burden, afraid to ask for things, constantly trying to be smaller and less troublesome. But here, surrounded by other children and given actual stability for the first time in her memory, she began to open up. She laughed more, played more. Her nightmares about freezing in the car came less frequently. She became especially close to Lily, the two youngest members of their underground family. They were inseparable, playing elaborate games with dolls and stuffed animals, creating whole worlds in their imaginations where everyone was safe and no one was ever hungry or cold. Jim watched all of this with quiet approval. He'd been doing this alone for so long that having another adult to share the burden made an enormous difference. Sarah handled the day-to-day care and emotional support, which freed him to focus on the logistics, maintaining the shelter, earning money through his handyman work, managing supplies, and most importantly, continuing his documentation. Because that's what drove him, ultimately. Every evening after dinner, Jim would retreat to his library office and work on his files, updating records, scanning documents, organizing evidence, building the case that he hoped would someday force the world to pay attention. One evening in early March, about 6 weeks after Sarah and Maya had arrived, Jim called Sarah into his office. She found him surrounded by papers as usual, but his expression was different tonight, troubled. "Close the door," he said quietly. Sarah did, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "Is something wrong?" Jim gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. We need to talk." Sarah sat, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Was he asking them to leave? Had someone discovered the sanctuary? Jim pulled out a worn folder and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning what looked like decades. Children of all ages and backgrounds. Some were Polaroids, faded and curled at the edges. Others were printed from digital files. Each photo showed a child, usually looking scared or tired or lost, standing next to Jim, who looked progressively older in each successive image. "I've helped 93 children over the last 26 years, Jim said quietly. Some stayed for a few days, some for years. Every single one of them is documented here, their stories, where they came from, where they went. Follow-up notes when I can get them." He flipped through the pages, and Sarah saw notes in Jim's careful handwriting. Reunited with grandmother in Kansas, 2007. Placed with foster family in New Mexico, 2012, still in contact, doing well. Aged out at 18, helped establish in apartment with job at warehouse, 2015. "You've kept track of all of them," Sarah said, awed. "Not all," Jim admitted. "Some I lost touch with. Some didn't want to stay in contact, which I understand. A few—" He paused, his finger resting on one photo. A teenage boy with haunted eyes. "A few didn't make it, went back to the streets, got involved in drugs or crime. One died, overdose, 3 years after leaving here. He was 19. Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I can't save everyone," Jim said, his voice heavy with old grief. "I learned that the hard way. I can only do what I can do. But that doesn't mean every failure doesn't hurt." He closed that folder and opened another one. "This is different. This is the evidence I've been collecting. The documentation of system failures. And Sarah, it's damning." He spread out papers across the desk. Official reports from Child Protective Services. Internal memos from social work agencies. Budget documents showing funding cuts. Statistics on children who aged out of foster care and became homeless. Letters from Jim to various officials and the inadequate responses, or more often, the complete lack of responses. I have proof that children reported as missing or endangered were never properly searched for, Jim said, his finger tapping on one report. I have documentation of shelters turning away minors because they didn't have proper identification or parental consent, even though those requirements are illegal in emergency situations. I have budget memos showing that programs designed to help homeless youth were defunded to allocate money elsewhere. He pulled out another stack. I have letters from social workers admitting they're overwhelmed, that they can't possibly manage caseloads of 80 to 100 children each. I have testimony from children who were physically or sexually abused in foster homes, who reported it and whose reports were ignored or dismissed. I have death certificates, Sarah. Children who died in the system because no one was paying attention. Sarah felt sick. How is this possible? How can this much failure exist and no one does anything? Because it's easier not to look, Jim said bitterly. Because these children don't have parents with money or influence to raise hell when things go wrong. Because the people in charge can always blame budget constraints or staffing shortages or procedural complications. Because ultimately our society has decided that some lives matter less than others. He gathered the papers back into neat stacks. I'm 73 years old, Sarah. I have high blood pressure, arthritis, and early signs of heart disease. My doctor told me last year I need to slow down. And I know I can't do this forever, maybe not even for much longer. Jim, Sarah started, but he held up his hand. Let me finish. When I'm gone or when I can't physically continue, all of this goes public. I've already set it up. I have a lawyer who knows nothing about the shelter, but who has instructions to release these documents to the media if I die or become incapacitated. Every major newspaper, every news station, every child advocacy organization. It'll be a scandal. It'll force investigations. It'll ruin careers. Good, Sarah said fiercely. They deserve to be ruined. Jim smiled slightly. Maybe, but here's the thing. Once those documents go public, this place will be exposed too. The sanctuary will be discovered. And everyone currently here will be taken by the state and put into the very system I've been trying to protect them from. Sarah's blood ran cold. No, there has to be another way. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Jim said, because I think there might be, but it would require you to do something that might be uncomfortable, something that might put you at risk. What do you need? Sarah asked without hesitation. Jim studied her for a long moment. I need someone to be my successor, someone who can continue this work after I'm gone, someone who can take over the sanctuary, maintain it, keep helping children. But more than that, I need someone who can eventually take this evidence and use it to force change, not after I'm dead, but while I'm still here to help navigate the fallout. I don't understand, Sarah said. Why not just release it now? Because I'm an old man living alone in the woods, Jim said. I'm easy to dismiss. They'll call me crazy, bitter, obsessed. They'll say I fabricated evidence or exaggerated failures. They'll discredit me and everything I've worked for will disappear into the news cycle within a week. He leaned forward. But if the information comes from someone else, someone younger, someone who's been living here, who's seen it firsthand, someone who can speak not just about system failures in the abstract, but about how those failures almost killed her and her daughter. That's harder to dismiss. Sarah felt the weight of what he was asking settle on her shoulders. You want me to be a whistleblower? Eventually, yes, but not yet. First, I want to teach you everything. How to maintain this place, how to find children who need help, how to provide that help safely, how to document everything properly. And then, when the time is right, when we have enough evidence that they can't ignore it, we go public together. You as the face, me as the backup. A mother who was saved by this place and who's now helping to save others. What about the children who are here? Sarah asked. What happens to them when we expose this? That's the delicate part, Jim admitted. We'd need to time it carefully. Wait until the current group has transitioned out to more permanent situations. Maybe keep the sanctuary empty for a few months before we make the announcement. That way, no one gets hurt by the revelation. Sarah thought about Jade and Tommy, about Lily and Sophie, about all the children who had found safety here. They'd have to know. We couldn't just send them away without explaining why. Agreed, Jim said. Full transparency. That's always been my policy. I'd sit them all down and explain the situation. Give them time to prepare. Make sure they're in stable placements before anything goes public. And you think this could actually change things? Sarah asked. You think exposing all this would force the system to do better? I think it's the only chance we have, Jim said. Right now, these failures happen in the dark. No one sees them except the people suffering from them. But if we shine a light, if we force people to see the children falling through the cracks, if we make it impossible to ignore, then maybe we can create enough pressure for real reform. Sarah was quiet for a long time, thinking about Maya, who had almost died because the system had nowhere to put them, about Jade, who'd lived under a bridge for 8 months while social services gave her pamphlets, about Jim's daughter Molly, who froze to death 2 blocks from people who were supposed to help her. What would I have to do? She finally asked. Over the next 3 months, Jim began training Sarah in earnest. He taught her how to maintain the shelter's systems, the ventilation, the plumbing, the electrical connections. He showed her his network of contacts, people who could be trusted to donate supplies or provide help without asking too many questions. He walked her through his filing system, explaining how every document was organized and why. But more importantly, he taught her how to find the children who needed help, how to listen on the streets for rumors of kids living rough, how to recognize the signs of abuse or neglect, how to approach scared children without seeming threatening, how to offer help without making promises you couldn't keep. The most important thing, Jim said one afternoon as they drove through a neighboring town, checking on a tip about teenagers squatting in an abandoned building, is to never lie to them. Never promise it'll be easy or that everything will magically get better. Be honest about what you can offer and what the limitations are. Children who've been let down by adults their whole lives can smell bullshit from a mile away. They found the building, an old warehouse scheduled for demolition. Inside, huddled around a camping stove, were 3 teenagers. 2 boys who looked about 16 and a girl who couldn't have been more than 14. They scrambled to their feet when Jim and Sarah entered, eyes wide and defensive. Easy, Jim said, his hands visible and open. We're not here to cause trouble, just wanted to make sure you're okay. We're fine, one of the boys said. He was tall and thin, his clothes hanging off his frame. Don't need any help. Okay, Jim said simply. That's your choice. But I'm going to leave some things here anyway, just in case you change your mind. He set down the backpack he'd been carrying and unzipped it. Inside were sandwiches, bottles of water, a first aid kit, warm socks, and a piece of paper. That's my phone number, Jim said, pointing to the paper. If you or anyone you know needs help, real help, not just platitudes, you call me, day or night, I answer. Why? The girl asked suspiciously. What do you want? Nothing, Jim said. Absolutely nothing. I just believe that children shouldn't have to sleep in abandoned buildings or go hungry or be cold. So if you decide you want something different, you call. If not, that's okay too, no pressure, no judgment. He turned to leave, then paused. By the way, this building's getting torn down next week, so even if you don't want my help, you'll need to find somewhere else to go. Be safe. They left. Sarah didn't say anything until they were back in Jim's truck, driving away. Do you think they'll call? Maybe, Jim said. Maybe not. That's not the point. The point is they know help exists if they want it. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that knowledge, that tiny seed of hope, is what keeps someone alive long enough to finally reach out. How many kids have you approached who didn't call? Sarah asked. More than called, Jim admitted. Way more. But some did. That's what matters. You can't save everyone, Sarah. You can only offer what you can offer and hope it's enough. 2 days later, Jim's phone rang at 3 in the morning. It was the girl from the warehouse. Her name was Nicole, and the police had raided their squat. The boys had run, but she'd been caught. They'd taken her to a youth detention center until they could figure out what to do with her. She'd lied about her age, said she was 18, and they'd let her make one phone call before processing. Jim picked her up 6 hours later with a story about being her grandfather, complete with forged documents Sarah had learned to create using Jim's careful instructions. They brought her to the sanctuary, got her cleaned up, fed her, and gave her a bed. She stayed for 3 months before Jim helped her reconnect with an aunt in Oregon who hadn't known she'd run away. Last Sarah heard, Nicole was finishing high school and planning to go to community college. "That's how it works," Jim told Sarah afterward. "One person at a time, one choice at a time, one life at a time." As spring turned to early summer, the dynamic in the sanctuary began to shift. Jade, now 16, had been accepted into an independent living program in Denver for youth aging out of foster care. The program would provide her with a small apartment, job training, and support services until she turned 21. She'd be leaving in August. Tommy had been working with Jim to track down an uncle in Arizona, his father's brother, who Tommy barely remembered, but who had apparently been searching for him. After months of careful verification and phone calls, they'd confirmed it was safe. Tommy would be moving there in September to finish his last 2 years of high school. Marcus, at 17, had gotten his GED and a job offer at an auto repair shop in a town 40 miles away. The owner, one of Jim's contacts, had agreed to provide housing and apprenticeship training. Marcus would leave in July. One by one, the pieces were falling into place. Daniel had been reconnected with his father, who had done the work to understand and accept his son's identity and who was fighting to regain custody. Sophie was being placed with a foster family who specialized in children with trauma backgrounds, a family Jim had carefully vetted over months of observation. Even Alex, who'd seemed like he might be there forever, had a grandmother in Texas who'd finally been located and who desperately wanted him. Only Lily remained uncertain. At 6 years old, with no known relatives and a past too traumatic for her to articulate clearly, her case was more complicated. But Jim was working on it, as he always did, with patience and determination. By late June, Jim sat everyone down for a family meeting. All 9 of them gathered in the main living area, sitting on couches and chairs and floor cushions, a circle of people who'd become family through circumstance and choice. "I want to talk to you all about something important," Jim began, his voice serious. "About what happens next. Not just for each of you individually, but for this place, for what we've built together." The children listened intently. They'd learned to trust Jim's serious voice, to understand that when he gathered them like this, it mattered. "I'm getting old," Jim said bluntly. "I won't be able to do this much longer. Maybe another year or 2, maybe less. And I've been thinking about what happens to this place, to this mission, after I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," Lily said, her small voice cracking. "You're not going anywhere." Jim smiled gently at her. "Not yet, sweetheart, but eventually. That's just how life works, and I need to make sure that what we've built here doesn't die with me." He looked at Sarah. "Sarah has agreed to learn how to run this place, to continue helping children after I can't anymore. But there's something else. Something I need all of you to understand and agree to." He pulled out one of his evidence folders. "I've been documenting the failures that led each of you here, the ways the system broke down, the ways adults who were supposed to protect you didn't. And I have a plan to expose all of it, to force people to see what's happening to children like you, to create enough pressure that things have to change." "Like whistleblowing?" Jade asked. She'd been reading the news more lately, preparing for her transition to independence. "Like those people who expose corporate fraud or government corruption?" "Exactly like that," Jim said. "But here's the thing. Once I expose this, they'll discover this place. They'll investigate. They'll ask questions. And everyone who's still here will be pulled into that investigation." The room went quiet.
Maya, sitting close to her mother, gripped Sarah's hand tightly. "That's why," Jim continued, "I'm waiting. I want to make sure every single one of you is safely transitioned out and settled before anything goes public. I will not put any of you at risk. You've been through enough." "But what about the kids who come after us?" Tommy asked. "If you expose this place, where will they go?" "That's the gamble," Jim admitted. "I'm hoping that by exposing the problem, by showing people exactly what's happening, we can force the creation of better solutions. Real shelters with real funding and real support. Changes to the system that make it actually work. But yes, it's a risk. This place will be destroyed to hopefully create something better." "Something legal," Marcus added. "Something legal and sustainable," Jim agreed. "Something that doesn't depend on one old man with a pension and a secret underground bunker." Jade spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "When were you planning to do this?" "Once all of you are settled," Jim said. "Once I know you're safe and stable. Probably sometime next year, if everything goes according to plan. But I wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest with you about what's coming. Because this affects all of you, even after you've left. Reporters might try to contact you. Investigators might have questions. People might judge you for having been here." "Let them judge," Tommy said fiercely. "This place saved my life. I'm not ashamed of that." "Neither am I," Jade agreed. Several other children nodded. "I want to help," Daniel said suddenly. "When you expose it, I want to tell my story. About being kicked out for being gay, about living on the streets, about how you found me and helped me. If it means other kids don't have to go through what I went through, I want to help." "Me too," Sophie said quietly. "I want people to know what it's like to be moved 17 times in 4 years. To never have anywhere that feels like home." One by one, the children volunteered. Not all of them. Some wanted privacy, wanted to move on without looking back, and Jim assured them that was completely okay. But enough of them wanted to speak up, wanted their stories to matter, wanted to turn their pain into purpose. Sarah watched them with tears in her eyes. These children who had been discarded, forgotten, abused, and neglected were volunteering to relive their trauma publicly if it meant protecting other children from the same fate. They were so brave it hurt. "Okay," Jim said, his own voice rough with emotion. "Okay, then we do this together, as a family. When the time comes, we tell the truth, all of it, and we let the world decide what to do with it." "What if they don't care?" Alex asked, fear in his voice. "What if you tell everyone and they just don't care?" Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then we'll have tried. We'll have done everything we could. And that's all anyone can ask. But I don't think people won't care, Alex. I think most people do care. They just don't know. They don't see. And that's what we're going to change. We're going to make them see." That night, after all the children had gone to bed, Sarah found Jim in his office, staring at the photographs on his wall. The 93 children he'd helped over 26 years. 93 lives changed because one man refused to accept that his daughter's death was meaningless. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked softly. "Terrified," Jim admitted. "What if I'm wrong? What if exposing this just makes things worse? What if I destroy this sanctuary and nothing better takes its place?" "Then you'll have done your best," Sarah said, echoing his own words back to him. "And you'll have inspired people like me to keep fighting. You'll have shown children like Maya that they matter, that someone cares. That's not nothing, Jim. That's everything." Jim smiled, tired but genuine. "When did you get so wise?" "About 6 months ago," Sarah said, "when I followed my daughter's footsteps to an impossible cabin and found a family I didn't know I needed." She paused. "I'm ready, you know, to take over when the time comes, to continue this work, to fight this fight." "I know," Jim said. "That's why I chose you." "You didn't choose me," Sarah corrected. "Maya did. She followed those footprints. She found this place. She saved both of us." "Then I guess we owe that brave little girl a debt we can never repay," Jim said. "No," Sarah said, looking at the photographs on the wall, at the evidence files stacked on the desk, at the future they were building together. We repay it by making sure no other little girl has to be that brave just to survive. And in that moment, in that underground office filled with evidence of failure and hope for change, two people who had been broken by the system made a pact. They would use their brokenness as a weapon. They would turn their pain into purpose. They would fight for the children who couldn't fight for themselves. The truth was coming. The world wasn't ready for it. But ready or not, it was time for the forgotten to be remembered. It was time for the voices crying in the wilderness to be heard. It was time for change. And it would start with footprints in the snow that led a desperate child to an impossible sanctuary. It would start with one man's refusal to let his daughter's death be meaningless. It would start with a mother who learned that surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight for the right to truly live. The summer sun beat down on the cabin above, warming the earth and coaxing wildflowers from the mountain soil. But below, in the cool depths of their underground haven, a revolution was being planned. Not with violence or anger, but with something far more powerful: truth. The leaves had turned to gold and crimson by the time the last child left the sanctuary. It was October, 14 months after Maya had stumbled through that blizzard and followed footprints that changed everything. Lily, the smallest and most fragile of them all, was the final one to go. Finding the right placement for her had taken Jim nearly a year of careful searching, background checks and observation. But he'd finally found it. A couple in Montana who had lost their own daughter to leukemia 3 years prior. They were experienced foster parents, trauma-informed, patient, and desperately wanting to provide a loving home to a child who needed one. Jim had visited them 4 times, unannounced, before he felt confident enough to even suggest them to Lily. The day Lily left was the hardest. She clung to Maya for nearly 20 minutes, sobbing into her shoulder, her stuffed rabbit crushed between them. "I don't want to go," she kept saying. "I want to stay here with you." "I know, sweetie," Maya whispered, her own tears falling freely. She was 8 now, taller and stronger than the half-frozen child who'd arrived at the cabin doors. "But you're going to have a real family. A mama and a daddy who will keep you safe forever. Isn't that what you always wanted?" "I want you," Lily said stubbornly. "You'll always have me," Maya promised. "Mr. Jim has their phone number. We can write letters, maybe even visit someday. You're not losing me, Lily. You're just getting more people to love you." Eventually, Lily released her grip. She said goodbye to Sarah, to Jim, to the underground rooms that had been her sanctuary for nearly 2 years. She climbed into Jim's truck with her small bag of belongings and her rabbit, and she waved through the rear window until they disappeared around the bend. The sanctuary felt empty without the sounds of children. No laughter echoing through the tunnels. No arguments over whose turn it was to pick the movie. No small feet running through the halls or voices calling out questions about homework. Just silence, vast and strange and somehow sacred. Sarah, Maya, and Jim sat together that evening in the main living area, the 3 of them small in a space designed for many. "It feels wrong," Sarah said quietly. "Like we should fill it back up. There are children out there who need help right now." "I know," Jim said, his voice heavy. "Believe me, I know. But we agreed. The sanctuary stays empty while we prepare to go public. It's the only way to protect everyone." "How long?" Maya asked. She sat curled against her mother, older now but still small for her age, still carrying the shadow of those months in the car. "Another month," Jim said. "Maybe 2. I want to make sure everyone's settled. Jade starts her 2nd semester at community college next week. Tommy's doing well with his uncle. I talked to him yesterday. Marcus is thriving at the auto shop. We need to give them all time to establish their new lives before the storm hits." "And then?" Sarah asked. "And then we tell the world everything." The planning took weeks. Jim worked with his lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had been helping him quietly for years, never asking too many questions, trusting that whatever Jim was doing was necessary. Now she finally learned the full truth, and she sat in the cabin living room reading through evidence files with an expression that shifted from shock to horror to fury. "This is explosive," Patricia said, looking up at Jim with wide eyes.
I knew the system was broken, but this level of documented negligence, the deaths that could have been prevented, the children who literally begged for help and were turned away, Jim, this will destroy careers, possibly trigger criminal investigations. Good, Jim said simply. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Okay, here's how we do this. First, we need to be strategic about timing. We go to the media, but not just local news. This needs to be big enough that it can't be buried. I'm thinking we approach the Denver Post and the Associated Press simultaneously. Maybe also contact that investigative journalist who did the series on prison conditions last year. What was her name? Rachel Martinez, Sarah supplied. She'd been studying journalism online, preparing for her role in all of this. Right, Martinez. She's aggressive but ethical. She'll verify everything before publishing, which is what we want. We need this to be bulletproof. Patricia flipped a page. Second, we prepare for legal fallout. Jim, you'll almost certainly face investigation. The shelter isn't zoned for residential use. You've been housing minors without being a licensed facility. None of the children were technically kidnapped or held against their will, but prosecutors might try to make something stick. I'm prepared for that, Jim said calmly. I'm 73 years old. If they want to put me in prison for saving children's lives, so be it. At least in prison, I'll get 3 meals a day and health care. Jim, Sarah started, but he waved her off. I'm serious. I've made my peace with whatever consequences come. That's not what matters. What matters is the children. We need to make sure that when this story breaks, it focuses on the system failures, not on me. I'm not the hero here. I'm just one stubborn old man who refused to let his daughter's death be meaningless. Patricia nodded slowly. Okay. Then Sarah, you become the primary voice. The mother who was saved by this place. The witness to both the system's failures and the success of Jim's alternative. You'll need to be prepared for interviews, for scrutiny, for people questioning your decisions and your story. I'm ready, Sarah said, though her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. What about me? Maya asked. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm part of this story too. I'm the one who found the cabin. I'm the one who followed the footprints. Don't I get to tell people what happened? Sarah instinctively moved to protect her daughter from the spotlight, but Jim spoke first. That's up to you and your mother, Maya. If you want to speak, we'll make sure your voice is heard. If you want privacy, we'll protect that too. You're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to carry this burden. I'm almost 9, Maya corrected automatically. And I'm not carrying a burden. I'm telling the truth. Isn't that what you said? That the truth is the most important thing? Jim smiled, proud and sad at once. Yes, that's exactly what I said. Over the next 3 weeks, they prepared meticulously. Patricia worked with Rachel Martinez, the investigative journalist, providing her with initial evidence and verification. Rachel spent days combing through Jim's files, cross-referencing reports, confirming dates and names. She interviewed Jim for hours, then Sarah, even gently talking with Maya with her mother present. This is the most important story I've ever worked on, Rachel told them during one late-night session at the cabin. I've been a journalist for 22 years. I've exposed corruption, covered wars, investigated corporate fraud. But this is children dying while the people paid to protect them looked the other way. This is systematic failure at every level. This is unconscionable. She looked at Jim with something like awe. And you've been fighting it alone for 26 years, building this place, saving these kids one at a time, documenting everything. You're either crazy or a saint. Probably both, Jim said with a dry laugh. The plan was to release the story on a Monday morning, time to catch the news cycle at its peak. Rachel's article would publish online at 6 a.m., with the print edition hitting stands by 7. Simultaneously, Patricia would hold a press conference at 9 a.m. in Denver, with Sarah and Jim present to answer questions. The evidence files would be released to multiple media outlets at the same time, preventing any single organization from burying the story. The night before it all happened, the three of them sat together in the underground sanctuary one last time. Maya had already gone to bed upstairs in the cabin, exhausted from the emotional weight of what was coming.
But Sarah, Jim, and the ghost of everyone who had passed through these rooms remained. "Are we doing the right thing?" Sarah asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at her for weeks. "What if we expose this and nothing changes? What if we destroy this sanctuary and there's nothing to replace it?" Jim was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs on the wall of his office. 93 children over 26 years. 93 lives that would have been lost or destroyed without this place. "I used to ask myself that every single day," he finally said. "Every time I brought a new child here, I wondered if I was doing more harm than good. If I was just putting a bandage on a severed artery. If I should be fighting bigger battles instead of helping individual kids." He turned to face Sarah, his weathered face lined with decades of grief and determination. "But then I'd remember Molly, my daughter. She was just one child, just one life, and she mattered. She mattered so much that losing her broke me in ways I'll never fully heal from. And if one life matters that much, then every life matters that much. Every single child I helped, that was a universe saved. That was someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's entire world." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "So yes," Jim continued, "we're doing the right thing. Even if nothing changes, even if the system stays broken, we'll have told the truth. We'll have honored every child who suffered because adults failed them. We'll have said loud and clear that these lives matter. And maybe that's enough to inspire someone else to build their own sanctuary, to fight their own fight, to refuse to accept that children should suffer because bureaucracy is complicated." "The footprints," Maya's voice came from the doorway. They all turned to see her standing there in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit that Lily had insisted she keep as a reminder. "That's what you told me, Mr. Jim. That sometimes you leave footprints for other people to follow, even if you don't know who's behind you in the dark." Jim smiled, his eyes shining. "That's exactly right, little one. That's exactly right." The next morning arrived cold and clear. Sarah woke before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety. She made coffee in the cabin kitchen while Jim prepared breakfast, and Maya sat at the table, unusually quiet. They ate together, this family bound not by blood, but by circumstance and choice, and the shared understanding that they were about to change everything. At exactly 6 a.m., Rachel's article went live. The headline read, "The Children the System Forgot, How One Man's Underground Sanctuary Exposed Decades of Failure." Within an hour, it had been shared 10,000 times. By the time they left for Denver, every major news outlet in Colorado was covering it. By the time they reached Patricia's office for the press conference, it had gone national. The conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones. Sarah had never seen anything like it. She stood at the podium with Jim beside her, Patricia on her other side, and Maya sitting in the front row with a victim advocate Patricia had arranged. The questions came fast and furious. "Mr. Holloway, did you kidnap these children? Miss Chen, why didn't you go to the police? Is it true you've been operating an unlicensed facility for over 2 decades? How many children have passed through your shelter? Were any of them harmed?" Jim answered calmly, methodically. No, he never kidnapped anyone. Every child came willingly and could leave whenever they wanted. Yes, the facility was unlicensed because licensed facilities had failed these same children. 93 children over 26 years. Not a single one harmed under his care, though many had been harmed before they arrived. Sarah told her story. The months living in the car, her daughter nearly freezing to death. The system that offered waiting lists and pamphlets instead of actual help. The sanctuary that saved both their lives. The children who became family. The choice to speak out so that others wouldn't suffer the same fate. "My daughter followed footprints through a blizzard," Sarah said, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. "She was 7 years old, and she was braver than any adult I've ever met. She followed those footprints to a cabin that shouldn't have existed, to a man who refused to let children die alone and forgotten. And that man saved us, not because he had to, not because anyone was paying him, but because he believed that every life matters. That children deserve better than what our society gives them."
She looked directly at the cameras. The question isn't why Jim Holloway built an underground sanctuary. The question is why he had to. The question is why, in the richest country in the world, children are freezing to death, starving, living on the streets, being abused in facilities that are supposed to protect them. The question is why we as a society have decided that some children don't deserve safety. And the answer is, we haven't. We just haven't been paying attention. Well, now you're paying attention. Now you know. What are you going to do about it? The room erupted. More questions shouted over each other. But Patricia stepped forward and Sarah stepped back, her part done. She'd said what needed to be said. The fallout was immediate and immense. By that afternoon, 3 state representatives had called for investigations into Child Protective Services. By evening, the governor issued a statement promising a full review of youth homelessness programs. By the next morning, the story had gone international, picked up by news outlets in 15 countries. But there was also backlash. Critics called Jim a vigilante, a criminal, accused him of undermining the very system he claimed to be helping. Some said he'd exaggerated the failures, that he was just a bitter old man with an agenda. Prosecutors in 3 counties opened investigations into his activities, and through it all, Jim remained calm. He'd expected this, prepared for it. "Let them investigate," he told Sarah as they watched the news coverage that evening. "Everything I did is documented. Every child is accounted for. Let them look as closely as they want. What they'll find is a broken system and one man who refused to let that brokenness be the end of the story." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah and Jim were interviewed dozens of times. The former residents of the sanctuary, now scattered across multiple states, began coming forward voluntarily to share their stories. Jade appeared on a national morning show, poised and articulate, describing her 8 months under a bridge and the night Jim found her. Tommy wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about aging out of foster care and the uncle who gave him a second chance because Jim had kept him alive long enough to find him. Even Lily, now settled with her adoptive family in Montana, sent a video message that her new parents helped her record. "Mr. Jim saved me," she said, holding her rabbit tight. "And now I have a mama and daddy who love me. But I still remember everyone at the sanctuary. They were my family when I didn't have one, and I'm not scared anymore." The public response was overwhelming. Donations poured in to child advocacy organizations. Volunteer applications at youth shelters increased by 300% in some cities. Politicians who had previously ignored youth homelessness suddenly made it a priority issue, sensing the political winds had shifted. But more than that, people started paying attention. Parents looked at homeless teenagers on street corners and saw children instead of problems. Social workers began speaking out about their impossible caseloads and demanding change. Foster families came forward with stories of systemic abuse they'd witnessed and been powerless to stop. Jim had been right. People did care. They just hadn't known. And now they knew. The legal consequences for Jim were less severe than expected. Prosecutors, facing public opinion that largely viewed him as a hero, offered a plea deal, community service, probation, and an agreement to work with the state to develop proper protocols for emergency youth shelter. Jim accepted immediately. "I never wanted to be above the law," he told the judge at his sentencing hearing. "I just wanted children to stop dying while we waited for the law to catch up with decency." The judge, a woman in her 50s who had clearly read every word of the coverage, sentenced him to 200 hours of community service consulting with the State Department of Human Services on youth shelter reform. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I cannot condone the methods you used, but I also cannot ignore the 93 lives you saved. This court finds that justice is best served not by punishment, but by putting your expertise to use, fixing the very system you fought against." Sarah watched from the gallery, Maya beside her, and felt a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. It was over. The truth was out. The fight was won, or at least the first battle was won. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the cold January air outside a newly opened facility in Denver. The sign above the door read, "Molly's Place, Emergency Youth Shelter."
It was the first of 5 such facilities being fast-tracked across Colorado, funded by a combination of state money and private donations that had flooded in after Jim's story broke. Unlike traditional shelters, Molly's place had no wait list, no requirement for parental consent, no maximum stay limit. If a child needed help, they got help. Immediately, no questions asked. The facility could house 30 children at a time, with medical care, counseling, education services, and most importantly, staff who were properly trained and paid living wages. Jim stood beside her, bundled in a heavy coat against the winter chill. He looked older now, more tired. The stress of the last year had taken its toll. But his eyes were bright as he stared at the building. "She would have liked this," he said quietly. "Molly. She would have liked knowing her name was on something that actually helps." "More than that," Sarah said, "she would have been proud of her father, proud of what you built, what you fought for, what you changed." Maya, now 9 years old and thriving in the public school Sarah had been able to enroll her in once they'd gotten permanent housing through a program created in the wake of the scandal, ran up to them with a handful of ribbons. "They're about to cut the ribbon," she announced excitedly. "And the mayor said we get to be in the front row because we're special guests." "We're not special," Jim said, ruffling her hair. "We're just people who did what needed to be done." "That's what makes you special," Maya said with the wisdom of a child who'd seen too much too young but had emerged stronger for it. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was brief but emotional. The new facility director, a former social worker who had quit her previous job after reading Jim's testimony, spoke about the importance of meeting children where they are rather than making them jump through hoops to prove they deserve help. Several residents of Molly's place, teenagers who had been on the streets just weeks ago, stood proudly as the ribbon was cut and the doors officially opened. After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the facility, a young woman approached Jim. She was in her mid-20s, well-dressed, confident, but her eyes were familiar. "Mr. Holloway," she said hesitantly, "I don't know if you remember me. My name is Amanda. You helped me in 2008. I stayed with you for 3 months before you helped me find my grandmother in Kansas." Jim's face broke into a wide smile. "Amanda, of course I remember. You were 12. You'd been living in a car with your mother who was—" "Struggling with addiction," Amanda finished. "Yes. You helped us both, actually. Got my mom into treatment. Helped me get to my grandmother. I graduated high school. Just finished my master's degree in social work." She gestured around the facility. "I applied to work here. I start next week." Jim's eyes filled with tears. "Amanda, that's wonderful. That's so wonderful." "I wanted to come full circle," Amanda said. "You saved my life. Now I want to save others. That's what you taught me. That's what all of this was supposed to be about, right? Paying it forward." "Yes," Jim said, his voice choked. "Yes, that's exactly it." As the sun set on that cold January day, Sarah found herself back at the cabin with Jim and Maya. The underground sanctuary remained sealed, a time capsule of a chapter that had closed so another could open. They sat around the fireplace in the cabin above, warm and safe, drinking hot chocolate and watching the flames dance. "What happens now?" Maya asked. "Now that Molly's place is open and all the other shelters are being built, are we done?" "We're never done," Jim said gently. "There will always be children who need help. The work doesn't end, it just evolves. But now there are more people doing it, more eyes watching, more voices speaking up. And that's what we fought for. Not for one man in one underground sanctuary to save every child, but for a society that decides every child is worth saving." Sarah looked at her daughter, this brave girl who had followed impossible footprints through a deadly storm and changed the world by doing so. "You started all of this, you know. You were the one who wouldn't give up, who kept walking when you could have turned back, who followed those footprints even though you didn't know where they led." Maya thought about that, her young face serious. "I didn't feel brave. I was scared the whole time." "That's what courage is," Jim said. "Being scared but doing it anyway. And you, little one, are the bravest person I've ever met." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, the night deepening outside the windows. Three people who had been broken by a system that failed them, who had found each other through desperation and hope, who had turned their pain into purpose and their survival into a movement. "Thank you," Sarah said suddenly, looking at Jim, "for everything, for saving us, for trusting us, for showing us that one person really can make a difference." "No," Jim said, shaking his head. "Thank you. You gave me something I'd lost when Molly died. You gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, her death could lead to something good. That suffering doesn't have to be meaningless, that we can build light from the darkest places." He paused. "And you're going to continue this work after I'm gone. You're going to make sure her legacy lives on." "We all will," Maya said firmly. "Me too. When I grow up, I'm going to help kids like Lily and Jade and Tommy. I'm going to be a social worker or a teacher, or maybe I'll build my own sanctuary. But I'm going to help, because that's what you do when someone leaves footprints for you to follow. You don't just follow them for yourself. You leave your own footprints for whoever comes next. Anyone can choose to follow footprints into the unknown if they're brave enough to believe that hope exists even in the darkest storms." As spring returned to the Colorado mountains once more, painting the world in green and gold, Sarah Chen stood at the entrance to Molly's place with a clipboard, checking in a frightened teenager who had been sleeping behind a gas station for 2 weeks. The girl's hands shook as she filled out the intake form, her eyes darting nervously like she expected someone to tell her this was all a trick, that there was no help after all. "You're safe here," Sarah told her gently, the same words Jim had spoken to 93 children over 26 years. "You're not alone anymore. You're not forgotten." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Really?" "Really," Sarah promised. And in that moment, in that simple exchange, the legacy continued. Not because one man built one sanctuary, but because he inspired others to believe that change was possible, that one life mattered enough to fight for, that children deserved better than society's neglect. Jim Holloway passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at 75 years old. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, most of them children he had saved who were now adults building their own lives. They didn't mourn him as a hero or a saint. They mourned him as the father figure who had refused to let them disappear, who had seen them when the world looked away, who had loved them when they couldn't love themselves. At his request, he was buried in a simple grave next to his daughter Molly. The headstone read, "He followed where his grief led, and it led him to grace." Maya, now 11 years old, placed a small stone on his grave, a Jewish tradition her mother had taught her. "Thank you for leaving footprints," she whispered. "I promise I'll leave some too." And she did. They all did. Every child who passed through that underground sanctuary, every life touched by Jim's refusal to accept that some children didn't matter, every person inspired by the story of one man's grief transformed into purpose, they all left footprints. Footprints that said, "This way to safety, this way to hope, this way to a world where children don't freeze alone in the dark because adults couldn't be bothered to see them." The little homeless girl who followed impossible footprints through a blizzard had become the woman who left footprints for others to follow. And the legacy of a man who built an underground sanctuary from his broken heart lived on in every child who found safety, every system that was reformed, every voice that spoke up and said, "Not on my watch." Because sometimes the greatest revolutions start with the smallest steps. One cold night, one desperate child, one set of footprints leading toward impossible hope. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to follow where they lead, you discover that the footprints weren't taking you somewhere. They were making you into someone who refuses to let others walk alone through their storms, someone who builds light in dark places, someone who believes that every life, no matter how small or forgotten, matters enough to save. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering hope with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that courage starts with a single step into the unknown, and that sometimes the smallest footprints lead to the biggest changes.